let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna go over a few slides this morning, something we normally don't do in webinars, but there's so many things around the topic of family portraiture that I want to talk about before we really get into the nuts and bolts of how to edit and retouch those. So I want to talk a little bit about all of those other things. So first off, big thanks to my wife, Whitney. As some of you guys know, my wife is a portrait photographer, and all of the family images that we're going to be using today are ones that she shot from her studio. You can check out her work at blissstudio.net. And again, all the images you see are from her anyway, and that is her and me and our little 2-year-old daughter, Lily, right there. All right, so let's talk about family portraits today. And I put this here as a joke. This is not what we're going for. This is a fail. This is what we don't want our family portraits to look like anymore. The world of family portraiture has changed a lot over the last 10 years. It's no longer about just getting the one family shot that you're going to sell a gigantic wall portrait to, and that's it. People are looking for more of a collection approach, a collection of smaller images instead of one giant image. You don't have to make sure everybody wears the same thing anymore, and not everybody needs to be looking at the camera. So rather than an image like this, which I can claim this is actually from our studio, but it's from about 10 years ago, let me go through and just show you a few examples of what family portraiture can look like today. So you can see we're going for more of a vintage look. That can be fun. You can use things like textures and special effects. People don't have to be looking at the camera, and they don't have to be the entire family. Family is a very diverse word these days. It can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. We do love couches. That's one of our recommendations, is to find yourself a very small, very lightweight couch that you can use. I always feel like there should be background music when I'm showing these pictures. I could try to hum for you guys, but that would probably be a fail. So there you go. Just an idea of what family portraiture can look like today instead of the old-fashioned way. Let's talk a little bit about what to wear. Like I said, everybody doesn't need to be in the same outfit. You can leave the khakis and the blue polo shirts to the people that work at IKEA. You do want to make sure that you do look similar, however. So you want to make sure you kind of all pick something in the same color family. You want to look like a family. You don't want to look like 5 different people standing there unless it matches your personality. If you have one person in the family whose personality sticks out, let them stick out. Some of the classic rules do kind of apply. You want to avoid solid whites and solid blacks. They can lead to exposure difficulties. Sometimes it's good to avoid really strong patterns, but again, these are kind of guidelines as well. You can break these rules. And I will also try to avoid super trendy looks as well, because it'll make the image age a lot faster. And even with the best planning, most family portraits only have about a 5-year shelf life before they start to look pretty old hanging on the wall anyway. Let's talk a little bit about the location that you choose and the time in the season that you work with. Even though we're here in Oregon, where we don't have the longest summers or the longest best weather, we still shoot just about everything outside. We try to look for parks or green spaces, or oftentimes even an urban setting. We'll shoot in alleys and places like that. All 9 of these images that I put up were shot within 100 yards of the front door of our studio. They're shot in the parking lot. They're shot on a little path that runs next to it. They're shot against the wall of the studio. So you don't have to go far. As long as you choose the right time of day and the right equipment, you can make almost any location look great. When we talk about time of day, again, you can really shoot just about any time of day if you can control your location, so you can position your subjects correctly. But late afternoon tends to be best. That way you can put the light behind them. You get a little bit more directional, warmer quality of light. And for us, because we do shoot outside a lot, we do prefer any time that there's something on the trees. And again, that's a guideline. You can shoot in the middle of winter, and we've shot in the middle of winter during a 5-minute break in the rain before. But when you actually have some leaves on the trees, they tend to look a bit better. All right, a couple more to talk about. Lighting and your lens choice. I mentioned a little earlier, try to make sure you can put the light behind your subject, or look for shade. So if you can find open shade, that works great too. But if you don't have any shade you can work with, position the light behind your subject. It'll act as a hair light. It'll light them up. and you get these beautiful wraparound light look. You do have to be a little careful of lens flare when you do this, and you'll typically need to add a little bit of light from the front to compensate because your background is going to be much brighter than your subject in the foreground. So you can add a little bit of extra light. A lot of times we'll use a reflector instead. Even on a family of 4 or 5, you can get away with using a large, like a 42 or 50-inch light disc as your light source. When you really need a lot, a portable flash can work well. You do need to be careful to be subtle, though. It's very easy to make flash look obvious in a family portrait. When it comes to picking a lens, we still like an 85, a longer portrait lens. It's tempting when you work with a family, especially a larger family, to use a wider angle lens, but you'll still have a lot of the downsides that you get with a wider angle lens. People's faces are going to get wider, and you're going to see a lot more of the background, and the background is going to be in focus. And what we want to do by using those longer lenses, you can take a narrower piece of the background, you can control your depth of field. I actually try to pick the longest lens that I can and still communicate with my family correctly. If I use a really long lens, like a 200mm lens, you're kind of yelling at your subjects as you might need to reposition them in an image. So the 85 is a great one to pick. All right, last one is a little bit about posing. And our rule on posing is just don't do it. People are not going to look natural. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to tweak things, but you're not going to do the classical posing where you look for golden triangles and make sure that, each person's chin is lined up with the forehead of the next person. It doesn't need to be that strict or rigid. It's just going to look posed. So what we'll typically do is we'll find the place where we want to shoot. We'll just tell our family, go stand over there, and then we'll see what happens. We just want them to interact and talk with each other, and then we'll kind of tweak it from there. If someone grabs someone in a good way, we'll have them hold that, and then maybe you'll move a hand so that the hand isn't in a bad spot. But it's really looking for that natural interaction that makes all the difference in an unposed family portrait. The last piece of advice I have is to shoot the breakdowns, and I'll show you what that means here in just a second. A lot of people in the past, when they go and shoot a family portrait, they'll look for this shot. They'll look for the main family shot. This is actually a raw shoot. There's about 250 shots in here. That's about what we would shoot on a family session. They would look for this shot, the main family shot, and then they'd be done. They say, oh, my job is done. I'm going to go home. I got the one shot that I need of the family. If you do that, you're doing a huge disservice to yourself. Shoot the breakdowns. You've got the family there. You've got the location there. You've done 90% of the work already. So go beyond just that family shoot and shoot the breakdowns. Go ahead and shoot the kids by themselves. Then shoot each kid by themselves. Every one of these new poses you shoot is a new opportunity to sell that image, or gives you the ability to sell collections, something you can put on the wall that has multiple images together. Again, people are shying away from that one giant canvas wall portrait. They want to be able to show more shots at a time. So instead, we go through and we make sure we shoot everybody in the family on their own. We make sure we shoot the collections of mom and dad. We make sure we shoot all the kids together. Spending that little bit of extra time to shoot those family breakdowns leads to probably double the sales you'd get if you just shoot that one family shot. And it gives you the ability to sell something like this. This is actually what we did for this client. We did a cluster of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 canvas gallery wraps together from that day. Now, another great thing to look at here is look at the amount of time that we spend on this. I'm going to go up to the very first image here. So this was shot at 1:57, and I'm going to go down to the last shot that we shot. That was shot at 2:40. So we spent about 45 minutes doing this entire shoot. Not a lot of time. Really, all shot in the same area. It's just an abandoned parking lot with a cool brick wall, and we drug a couch there. Alrighty. So before I actually dig into any of the actual retouching and the using the on-one stuff, John, are there any general questions we can answer?
No, actually, don't have any questions up at the moment, so continue on. Looking
All
good.
right, I scared them all off already. All righty, so let's jump in, and I'm actually going to show you how to do some retouching of family portraits using our tools. Now, the first one we're going to do is we're going to go through and I'm going to show you a little bit of some portrait retouching. That tends to be one of the first steps I'll do. And depending on the family shot, you may need very little portrait retouching. On a lot of our shots, you're seeing the profile of your subjects because they're looking at each other or they're so far away that there's not a lot of distinguishable detail in their faces. So I actually threw in one shot here which is a little tighter than what we would typically do for a family portrait, but it's a small family, and we can actually show you how to do some portrait retouching on it. I'm using Lightroom today to manage my images. I just select the image I want to work on. We'll go up to the File menu. We'll go down to Plug-in Extras, and I'm going to send it to Perfect Portrait. Lightroom will generate a copy of that JPEG image, sends it to the Perfect Photo Suite, and we'll open it up in Perfect Portrait. And when Perfect Portrait launches, it's going to go through and it's going to find every face in our scene. Even if it's a family with a lot of people in it, it's going to go through and detect all of those faces. So you can see it found 1, 2, 3 faces. And right now, where we see the little boxes around their faces, we're kind of in what we call face select mode. And the face select tool is selected. And the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to click on which face we want to work on because each face in the scene can have its own settings. That's the cool thing about Perfect Portrait is rather than having everybody get the same amount of retouching, I can go in and control how much each person gets and handle them individually. So let's start with Mom. All I do is I just click on her. It's going to zoom into just her face, and it's going to show the control points for the eyes and the mouth. We try to automatically find the eyes and the mouth for you, and this allows us to do things like whiten the eyes or sharpen the eyes or whiten the teeth. And what we want to do is we just want to adjust these little guidelines. We do our best to position them for you, but it's not going to be perfect every time. So just click on the little control points and just make any adjustments that you need to make sure that they fit the outlines of those areas. So I'm just dragging this one down to match the bottom of her lip, and then the bottom of the teeth, and the top of the teeth, and the top lip. Once you get those set, click on this little button up here that says Hide Controls. That'll hide those control points and lets me see what the results of my retouching are going to look like. Now, I like to start with a preset. Over on the left-hand side, there's presets for children, families, male, female. I'm going to go to the female category, and I like a kind of a natural-looking retouch. So I'm going to go down, and I'm going to grab the natural retouch option. And this will add a light amount of blemish and smoothing to the skin and adds just a little bit of whitening to the eyes and the mouth. That looks pretty good, except I want to do a couple little adjustments. She has some fairly heavy eye bags under her eyes. So I'm going to grab the retouch brush right here, and I'm just going to use the retouch brush to paint underneath her eyes. So just make a pass under each eye, and it will grab and smooth out those eye bags, just like that. There's a little pocket right there. That looks pretty good. I think her eyes could use just a little bit more detail. So we'll go to the eye and mouth pane, to the detail slider, and I'm just going to bring that up just a little bit to maybe about 25. The other thing is the exposure on this shot is just a little overexposed, just a little hot. So their skin is right on the edge of being a little brighter than what I would like. And I can bring that down by using the shine option in the skin retouching pane. So if I bring that up to about 25, it'll push the skin down just a little bit. There we go. Now, all I need to do is go to the next face. To go to the next face, I'll just click back on the face edit tool here, and I'll just click on the next button right here, and it'll move to the next person's face. There we go. So it moves to Dad. I'll show the control points. It actually pretty much nailed the control points on Dad. I don't really need to adjust much, maybe just the corner of that one eye. We'll hide the controls, and now we'll go find a preset for Dad. Now we don't want something in the female category that's going to smooth out his skin too much. So I'm going to go to the male category. Let's zip down and we'll find natural, and we'll add that for him. That'll adjust the sliders for his look. And then I think the eye detail is just a little too high. So I'm going to bring that down for him. He has very dark rings on the outer edge of his eyes already. So he doesn't need a lot of enhancement. But he drinks a lot of coffee like I do, so he probably could use a little bit more whitening of his teeth. So I'm just going to crank up that whitening of the teeth. He has that same overexposure, so we'll bring the skin shine down just a little bit, maybe a little bit more for him. And he's got a little zit there on his neck. So we'll grab the retouch brush and we'll just zap that little zit gone. There we go. And now all we have left is the little guy. So we'll move to his face. Let's take a look at the control points. Now here we didn't do nearly as good of a job. So let me show you how to reposition those control points. Now again, we try our best to do it automatically, but we're not going to hit it every time. So on an eye, the blue dot in the middle should go in the middle of the eye. So I'm just going to place that in the middle of the eye, and then just move the 4 corner control points to the outside of the white part of the eye, the sclera. There we go. And what these control points do is it defines the locations where we do the retouching for the eyes and the mouth. Now, they don't have to be 100% perfect. These guidelines give us the general region, but the actual selection that we make is based on color as well. So it automatically feathers and protects. There we go. We'll hide the controls. Same thing we did on the other two. I'm just going to go to the presets. Let's go to children, and we'll grab the natural preset for children. There we go. We'll do the same amount of shine reduction that we've done on everybody else so he matches, and he could probably use just a little bit more detail in his eyes. There we go. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the entire family looks like now. I'm just going to hit the fit button, go back. Actually, let's zoom in just a little bit more so it's easier to see their skin. I'm just going to draw a box over the part that I'm interested in. Let it render here. All right, so there's after. And I'm going to toggle it to before so you can see the original. There's before. And we'll turn after back on. After, just like that. So it's that quick to go through and retouch an entire family. You just take them face by face, add a preset, and then make any little minor adjustments you need to. All right, Johnny, any
Looks great,
questions
Dan.
on Perfect Portrait?
Yeah, quick question. A couple have the shot against the wall there, the brick. Are you using all natural light, or are you actually using like a fill flash?
This one
No.
is, let's take a look at the eyeballs, is actually not fill flash, it is a reflector. So this is actually open sky is the main light. So we're probably on like the north side of a building. And then we're using just a little bit of a reflector to fill in on them. Probably like a 42-inch silver light disc. You can kind
Okay.
of see that
Excellent.
little extra sparkle in their eye down low, which is that light disc. And then the main catch light in the upper right of their eye is actually the open sky.
Somebody else is having problems locating what with you were doing the next to the next face. So can you point out that
Yep.
the arrows again on how you sort of jump from face to face?
Yep. There's actually like 3 different ways that you can jump from face to face. The way that I was doing it is when you have the face edit tool selected, that's the second tool down, the one that looks like a head. That's when you'll see these little buttons for previous and next face. You can also do that by going up to the face menu and picking next or previous face. Or anytime, you can always click on the first tool, the face select tool. And when you do that, it's going to zoom back to kind of a survey view, and it's going to show you the boxes on each face. And then you just click in the box for which face you want to work on as well. All 3 ways will get you to the next face.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan.
Alrighty, cool. I am just going to cancel out of this one. And now we're going to go in and do some more stylizing instead. So let me jump back to Lightroom here. And I'm going to grab, this is one of my favorite shots. You know, for a lot of people, this would be a throwaway shot, but this is a great shot to me. It's this fun kind of urban hipster family. So we shot them in an alleyway. Yes, there's a green dumpster over there. That's okay. I love it. Dad's jumping. We got the little boy's butt crack showing. Let's go in and we're going to turn this to a very authentic, high-speed black and white shot. So first thing I want to do is I actually want to blur this left-hand side a little bit. I really want to focus on the family. And there's a lot of junk in this alley on the left-hand side that's a little too sharp because it's the same focal plane as the family. So we'll use focal point first to soften the edge, and then we'll go to perfect black and white to make it black and white. Whenever I want to use more than one module at a time, rather than selecting that individual module here in the plugin extras menu, I just select send it to the perfect photo suite. And when I do that, I can go through and use any modules I want in any order that I want. And when I'm done and I save and close the image, it'll take me back to Lightroom. So here we go. It's going to make a copy of this image. It'll send it to the suite, and it's going to start off in the Layers module. The Layers module is kind of like the home base for the suite. And then at the top, I've got my module selector, and I can click on whatever module I want to work on. I want to go to Focus because I want to decrease the focus on the left-hand side. Focus is the other name for focal point. Let's go ahead and open it up here. Focal point remembers the last settings that were used. I'm not interested in the last settings, so I'm just going to say Reset All. And we're going to start by setting the area that we want to keep in focus. And that's done in focal point by using this little guy in the middle called the focus bug or the masking bug. And there's two different shapes. There's the round shape, which is the one that is selected by default. I don't want the round one. I actually want the square one. So I'm going to come over here to the focus bug pane where it says shape, and I'm just going to pick planar instead. Planar is a fancy name for square. And then all you do is you grab the body of the bug and you stick it over what you want to keep in focus. I want to keep the family in focus. So I'm going to stick it right in the middle of them. And then outside of its body, you see two little legs and two big antennas. I'm going to grab the little legs and I'm just going to pull. And you notice as I pull those, the area that's in focus is getting larger. So I just want to pull that area to make it larger so that everybody is in focus. The next thing I want to do is I want to control the amount of blur. This amount of blur on the left is too much. It doesn't look realistic, and it's so easy when you use a blurring tool like focal point to overdo the amount of blur. We probably only need like 10 or 15 to make this look realistic. So just grab the amount slider. Instead of using 30, I'm going to bring it down to about 15 instead. There we go. See how much more realistic that looks, even going something as low as 10. It's not going to take away all those distractions. It's just going to take the edge off them. So I'm going to go for about 15 in this case. The other thing I want to do is I really want to soften that dumpster just a little bit more. And we can do that still using this masking bug. I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller here, so that it actually comes in and it's going to start to blur the little dude on the right here just a little bit. But let me show you how we can bring him back. I'm going to use the focus brush. The brush lets me paint focus in or out. I want to make sure that I'm painting focus back in. So right here it says paint focus. And then all I do is I just brush where I want the focus to come back. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here. And now all we do is I'm just going to paint right on this little guy. I'm just going to paint right up to the edge of him, and this will be just enough to start to bring the focus back on him. But it'll make sure that that ugly dumpster is just a little bit more out of focus. And for final production, you'd want to make sure to zoom in and look at the mask and be super critical of this type of work. Today, because we're kind of doing it for a webinar, I don't want to spend 10 minutes doing this retouching. So I'm just going to do kind of a cursory one so you guys can get the idea. And actually, I think that did a pretty darn good job. There we go. Let's go back to Fit to Screen. I'm just going to double click on the hand tool to do that. And let's go ahead and take a look at the before and the after. So there's before and after. So you can see how we really kind of brought the focus just to our couple, our family in the middle. A little guy over here on this side's just a little out of focus too. So let's just make sure he's in focus. There we go. All right, I'm going to apply that. It's going to go back to perfect layers instead of going back to Lightroom, and it's going to let us continue to use more modules if we want to now. So here we are. Now we'll go to black and white to give it a black and white look. All right, in black and white, I want something that kind of has a high speed, almost a photojournalistic kind of look. So I'm going to go to the high speed documentary category right here. And I can roll that down and it'll actually show me a little thumbnail of each one of these presets on my image. But even better, I can use the new Quick View browser just by clicking the Quick View button right here. And this will actually bring up a full screen preview of all of those presets on my image. And I can just click on the one that I want. The one that I want is this bottom one called Paparazzi. So I'm just going to select that. There we go. Paparazzi really looks like high-speed black and white film. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can take a look at this. So those of you guys who grew up in the darkroom like Johnny and I will really appreciate. You can see the actual film grain being applied, and this is actual honest-to-goodness Kodak 3200 film grain that we scanned, and it gets applied to the image. It matches the same tonal scale that you get using a high contrast filter like a polycontrast 3 or 4. And we also added a vignette around it as well. That vignette darkens the edge. You can go through and you can adjust anything that's done in a preset on the right-hand control panes. So if I wanted to go in and I wanted to control the amount of vignette, I just go to vignette and use the brightness slider, and I can control how strong I want that vignette to be. I want the vignette to be pretty strong in this case. We're going to use kind of the old hand of God burning and dodging there. There we go. When I'm happy with those results, I would just hit apply. But I think I want to add a border to this one. So I'm going to go to the border pane. I'm just going to turn borders on. I don't really want an antique look. I want more of a sloppy border look like we would have done in the darkroom. So from the category pop-up, I'll just select sloppy borders. And then for the border type, I'll pick what I like. Actually, I kind of like this one. This pen line is always one of my favorites, but it's a little too
One of my
thick.
favorites too there, Dan. Love that one.
So now we're just going to grab that size slider, and we're just going to bring this so that it just touches the edges of the image. There we go. Perfect. There we go. Yeah, I like the pen line because it's a little bit more subtle. There's a lot of ones that are really thick, but I just want to add kind of a very thin looking border to my image. So let's look at the before and the after here. So there's the color image, and there's our black and white image. I think it matches this image a lot better to add that black and white touch to it. And we'll apply this. It'll go back to perfect layers. And I'll show you one of the other great things about working this way, going through perfect layers. I have it set so that my files that come out of Lightroom through the suite are a Photoshop file, which means it's going to maintain all of the different layers in my image. You can control that. Here's a great tip for the day. If you go to your preferences, it's under the Perfect Photo Suite menu for the Mac. It's under the Edit menu on Windows. You can go to the Lightroom Plugins tab, and you can select what file type, what color space, what bit depth is generated, and how it's stacked back with the original in Lightroom. And if your original file is a Photoshop file, you can open and edit that file rather than making a copy of it. So this is a very powerful section in the preferences a lot of people never go in and set. And because I work in that PSD, each step in my process is its own layer in a layered Photoshop file, which I can open in layers or in Photoshop and work on it. So I can go back at the bottom. There's my original color image, like I'd done no work to it all. The next layer is a copy that has the focal point adjustments applied to it, and then the layer above that is the one with my black and white conversion on it. So if I want to go back and change something, I can always just throw a layer away and go back and redo that step in the process. When I'm done, I just hit the Save button. It'll save it back out to disk, and then I'll close it. When we go back into Lightroom, that image will have been round-tripped, and it's automatically back in Lightroom up to date. So let's take a look here. And I think there it is. Lightroom just updated it. All right, so any questions on the black and white stuff that I've done so far, Johnny?
Not so much on the black and white, but good question comes up, and we get this a lot, is there a good practice as to which module you're really going to start with?
That's a good question. And the modules are actually kind of listed in the order that you would typically use them. Now, again, this is all a guideline. You can break these rules at any point in the process, but kind of my process is I want to do the most basic global adjustments first. So anything that I'm doing, color correction, tone correction, I'm going to do first, kind of the corrections, but not the effects. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to do my retouching. So any portrait retouching or any spot retouching that needs to be done would be second. Then I'm going to go in and do my fun effects. And the order of those are not as important. I could use focal point and then do a special effect, or vice versa. You're not going to see a huge difference. I think personally I tend to use focal point first. I don't know why. I guess it's just the way I think about it. If you're going to do something with a border, you tend to want to do the border pretty close to the end. And then if you're going to do resizing for output with perfect resize, that's always kind of the last step in the process.
That's great, Dan. Yeah, I'd second to say that there is no right answer to this. It's kind of like what's based on your workflow. Dan and I use the product a little differently in different ways, but the end result is, what kind of image you want to deliver to your client. Another question came up about, you've got all these photos. how are you ultimately presenting these photos to the client?
That's a great question. What we'll typically do is from this big shoot that's going to have, two, three, 400 pictures from it, depending on the size of the family and how many breakdowns we do. We'll go through in Lightroom, we'll edit that down to probably 50 or 60 shots that are our favorites. And then we actually require that that family comes back into our studio and they sit down in our sales room, and we have a giant screen and a projector, and we actually use we will typically make a slideshow first using Animoto, which is a great service for doing slideshows for photographers. You just upload your photos to it. If you shoot little video clips, you can put your video clips in it, and it will generate these great looking slideshows, which you can then use for sales in your studio, but you can also put them on social media, and you'll get all the family sharing that. And so you get lots of great social media action going on by doing that. We'll watch that video, then we'll go through and we'll talk about what they want to order. And we use a tool called ProSelect for actually doing the sales session, which is kind of it's like a salesman's version of Lightroom. Although to be honest, Lightroom can do a great job of most sales tasks as well. And we'll just go through and do it that way. It's
Excellent.
always better to get the customer back into your studio where you can actually talk to them. I know a lot of photographers who just give them a disc. Well, that's a disservice to them. You can't hang a disc on the wall. You want to be able to make sure they get a finished product at the end of the day. And even using a service where you put them online and the customer has to order, that's kind of puts uh, it puts the customer in the driver's seat. They have to remember to go do it. So they're just going to drag their feet because it takes time. And honestly, they don't know what to do. I mean, it's like if you went to a bakery, you're not going to tell the baker everything you want on the cake. You're just going to pick the thing out that the baker gives you as the options because they're the professional. They know what's going to look good. So it's kind of the same thing with photography. You need a photographer, an artist, to walk you through their work and tell you what's going to look good. So it's a consultative process.
That's great, Dan. Appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Somebody was. I've seen a couple. Are you using a Wacom or tablet or, of any kind?
I am not. I'm just using a mouse today. I do use
Excellent.
a,
But I
a
do want to
Wacom
point out we
tablet.
are compatible with Wacom tablets as well. But today Dan is using a mouse, so I've seen that a couple times.
Yeah, I do use a Wacom tablet if I'm doing lots of heavy retouching and brushing. There's actually an image we're going to do here in a minute where I probably would be best if I used it, but I tend to like to not use it for demos so that people know you don't have to have one. You can get by just fine without. It does make your life faster if you have one. Uh, all right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to do
Excellent.
a very quick, simple effect on one, and then we're going to go through kind of a longer process. What I want to do is I really want to take this great looking outdoor shot and I want to add kind of a cool vintage flair to it. So I'm going to select the image. Here's the original. You can see it's a little bit flat. This happens a lot of times when you're shooting with that sun behind your subject. In order to get the exposure correct on your subject, you're going to have to open up and overexpose the background a little bit. And luckily, this is actually really a popular style these days. You'll see a lot of advertising where there's a lot of lens flare and a lot of soft bokeh in the background. But we just want to add a little bit more contrast, a little bit more color back to it. So we're going to send this off to, and because I'm only going to use a single module to do this, I'm just going to send it straight to Perfect Effects. All right, so here we are inside of Perfect Effects. I'm going to add a couple different effects. And the nice thing about effects, if you haven't used it, is you can stack multiple effects on top of each other. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to go down to my vintage category. Vintage is probably my go-to place these days. So in the vintage category, rather than opening it up and looking at the thumbnails, I'm going to use the Quick View browser again. So just click on the Quick View button, and this shows me my image with all of the different vintage effects applied to it. So it's a great visual way to shop for different effects. I'm just going to scroll through until I find one that I like. This one looks pretty good. Mare would work pretty well, and so does Nicely Toasted. I'm actually going to go with Nicely Toasted because it's a little bit more yellow to it. To use it, I just click on it, and it'll add that effect on top of my image. And then with the amount slider, I can control how strong it is. Every effect that you add in Perfect Effects is always going to start at its maximum strength. That is almost always too much. So you almost every time want to adjust how much you want to add to that image. I'm only going to use like 50 or 60% of it here, maybe 70, just so you guys can see the difference. Let's go ahead and show you a before and after here. So there's our original before image. And there's after, just by adding that one effect. Now, let's keep going. Let's add some more to this one. I want to add a little bit of a glow. We kind of have almost a natural glow to it just because of these bright highlights. I want to add a little bit more. So to add an effect, I just click on the Add button right here at the bottom of the stack. It'll add a new empty effect layer, and we can go off and we can add a glow on top of it. Now, if you know the name of the effect or even something you're looking for, you can use the search field. I'm looking for a glow, so I'm just going to type in glow. It'll find all of the effects that have glows in them. And just like we did before, I can actually use the Quick View browser on my search results by clicking on the little Quick View browser button. So now it shows me just my search results in a way that I can go in and look at them. So let's go through here until we find one that we like. You can control the size of these thumbnails by using a slider at the bottom. So if you want more of a survey view, you can view more at a time. Because I'm looking for a glow, I want to keep it zoomed in pretty close. I think I'm going to use this one right here called Glow Baby. We'll click on that. It adds it. Again, with the slider, I can control how much of that glow I'm interested in. There we go. And I think the only other thing I want to do is I want to paint back in just a little bit more detail or a little bit more contrast on their faces, just so they pop out a little bit more. So I'll add a layer. I'm going to go to my basic brushes category. In the basic brushes, let me roll this down. You notice they have a little paintbrush on their corner. That means they're a paint in effect. Whenever I add one of these effects, it's not going to add it to the whole image. It's just going to load up my brush and I just paint it where I want it to go. So I'm going to look for a little more contrast, a little more detail. Here we go. Let's use brush more detail. So this adds a little bit of kind of what we call local contrast to the image. So I'll select that. You'll notice nothing happened to my image, but my brush is automatically selected and my mode is set to paint in. And all I do is paint it where I want it. Now I'm going to bring my opacity down just a little bit because I want it to be fairly subtle. And then I'm just going to paint this gently right there on their faces. Just enough to add a little kiss of detail to make those pop in and out. We can turn that on and off here in the effect stack. You notice the effect stack is just like a layer stack back in layers where I can look at each effect's results and they stack and combine on top of each other. So if I turn just that top one off, I can see just the results of that little bit of detail brushing that we did. Or if I use the global preview check mark at the bottom, I can see the overall before and after. And you can always use the Command P on a Mac or Control P keyboard shortcut on Windows to turn that on and off. All right, when we're happy with the results, we would just hit apply. All right, any questions before we move on to our next image?
No, it looks good.
All right.
Somebody did ask, how are you getting that mist look that's sort of in your images?
Missed a look?
Yeah, they're kind of soft focus, and I'm gonna say it's shooting with light behind you that gives
Yeah.
you those sort of really bright highlights, and your choice of lens with depth of field. But I'll let you answer that.
I think you're probably right on. My wife, she tends to shoot with an 85 millimeter lens, which is a 1.8 aperture on it, and she'll shoot pretty wide open most of the time, which gives you a very shallow depth of field. So that kind of gives you that creaminess around your subject. And then by adding in that backlight, it's going to cause those overexposed areas to flare more, so they're going to get more glowy when they're out of focus. And something that is overexposed but in focus is just going to be a white dot, but something that's out of focus and overexposed is going to have a nice glow to it. So I think that's a lot of it. Plus, she doesn't clean her lenses very often, so there's probably all sorts of dust on there. So that helps too.
Well, it looks great.
Yeah. All right. Without further ado, let's go on and show you guys. I'm just going to cancel out of this image rather than applying it, and we'll jump back here to Lightroom.
Quick reply to somebody. Somebody's asking the keyboard shortcuts for paint in, paint out. That is the X key. It's a great keyboard shortcut to learn too. Whenever you're using our masking brush, use the X key to toggle between paint in and paint out.
Yep. You can also hold down the Option key to temporarily toggle it as well.
Okay, excellent. I didn't know that. There's a great little master tip from Dan himself.
Yeah, if you're familiar with most of the Adobe apps, if you've come from Lightroom or come from Photoshop, we try to match their keyboard shortcuts as much as possible so that the things you would normally do just work. So changing brush size using the bracket keys, for example, or holding down the space bar to temporarily toggle to the hand tool to reposition your image. A lot of those things that just almost become muscle memory to you work the same way in the Perfect Photo Suite. All right, I
Excellent.
think we're going to have time for probably one more image today. And this is kind of a complex one, so I'm saving it for a bit last. And this is a raw image straight out of the camera, and it was kind of our favorite shot from that family that I showed you. But there's a couple of things that happened here. First off, when we scouted this location out the week beforehand, it was this beautiful orange wall. And then we show up with the family there, and some graffiti tagger has painted pink or purple paint all over the damn brick wall, and it really ruined the shot for us. But luckily, we could do a little bit of retouching. The other thing is this wall to me is too in focus, especially right over here on the left hand side. So I want to make it look like it's less in focus behind them. So let's go through the process of actually doing that. And then we're going to show you how to create a complex selection using the selection tools in Perfect Mask so that you, excuse me, so that you can then feed that into Perfect Focus and blur just a portion of the image. So rather than actually opening this one, I'm going to open the after image right here, and I'll walk you through the process of it. All right, so the first thing we did when we opened this image is we actually cropped it. Let me turn a few layers off here so you can actually see the beginning. So here's actually that original image that we started with. We did crop it a little bit. So if I just toggle back to Lightroom for a moment, you'll actually see the original. There's the original composition. There's, whoops, wrong button. You'll see there's a little too much foreground. There's rock in the gravel in the parking lot, and they're pretty well dead centered in the shot. We really kind of want them lower and to the right. So we just recropped it using the crop tool in Perfect Layers to get us to this point. This is actually what the final shot looks like, and we'll show you the steps to get to this. So let's go into layers here, and we'll walk you through the process. So the first thing we did is we cropped it. The second thing we had to do is we had to get rid of all of this annoying paint. And we did that using the clone stamp tool. So I'm just going to select that layer. We're going to grab the retouch brush right here. And I'm just going to make sure that the use clone brush option is on. Let me show you how this works. For those of you who have worked in Photoshop for years, you'll be familiar with this. But for those of you guys who haven't, let me show you how it works. The clone stamp works by you tell it an area that you want to clone from, and then you paint over the area you want to fill it with. So I want to get rid of this line right here. So what I would do is I would hold the brush in a space where I want to sample from. I'm going to hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on Windows. It changes to a little target, and I'm going to click. And what that does is it loads my brush up with that spot. You notice now as I move my brush around the scene, I'm actually seeing what it's going to fill with. It's going to fill with the area that I told it to fill with over here. So now I just move my brush to the area that I want to get rid of, and I click with my mouse and I just drag. You notice as I drag, there's a little target to the right of it that tells me where it's sampling from. So it's sampling from the plus and filling into that circle, just like that. Now, I don't have to be 100% perfect for this because I'm going to blur this background a bunch at the end. What I'm really trying to do is I just want to get rid of this obnoxious purple in there that shouldn't be in there. Now, I'm not going to go through and do this whole thing because it probably took me about 10 minutes to go through and do all the retouching on it, but I'll show you what it looked like when I was done here. But just to give you guys a little idea of how to use that tool, just like that. So I'd say definitely practice with that tool. It's super handy. I also got rid of these parking barriers as well. Same idea, just option click in the area that you want to sample from, move over what you want to get rid of, and then just paint over them, something kind of like that. And you can be sure to randomize your strokes a little bit so that it looks a bit more natural, kind of like that. So that got us.
Quick question, Dan. Is
Uh-huh.
there a good sort of general, when do you use the healing brush versus the clone brush?
Good question. So I will use the retouch brush without the clone brush option for small things, typically on a fairly consistent background. It's great for things like power lines or dust spots or blemishes, zits on skin. It's perfect for things like that. But on something that has a strong pattern like the brick, if I try to use it, it's probably going to soften it too much. It's going to lose too much detail in the process. So for example, if I have that retouch brush with the clone option off and I was to paint a large area like this line over here on the right, you notice how there's a little too much boundary to it for my
Yeah,
taste. When you use the clone brush, it gives you a lot more control. You can pick exactly where you're cloning from and where you're cloning to. So for larger areas, I think the clone brush is a better tool to use.
excellent. Thanks.
So after spending a few minutes and going through and retouching out all these annoying little purple lines and getting rid of these parking barricades, it got us to this point. Now again, this is not perfect retouching at all, but I'm going to be blurring that background, so I'm not super agonizing about that. The next step is I need to go in and I need to make a selection where I can keep the family on the couch, but get rid of pretty much everything else. So to do that, we're going to go into Perfect Mask to do that. So I'm just going to select the layer that I want to work on here. I'm going to turn off all the layers except for that one, and let's click on Mask. The mask comes up, it's going to go through and segment the image. This is a really important part, but most people don't really understand what it's doing. What the segmentation does is it divides the image into like colored segments, and it makes it a lot faster for getting rid of the background. But in order to really know if you've used the right setting, you need to go to Segment View. So down here in the bottom, a little pop-up, select on Segments, and this actually lets you see the segments in the image. And on an image like this, it has a very complex background. All those little bricks create a million little segments, and it would take a long time to get rid of those. However, if we come up here and we take the segment control and we bring it up, those segments will get larger and they'll coalesce together and it'll make it faster to get rid of it. So what I typically do before I do anything in Perfect Mask is I'll open the image, I'll go into segment view, and I'll turn this segment up until a segment in my subject starts to become the same segment as my background. Let me show you what I mean. So right now, I can see the outline of the couch and the outline of my family very clearly. As I start to increase the segment size, I'm going to go really high. Let's go up to like 38. And as soon as I do this, you'll notice that, oh my gosh, I've lost most of my family. They've fallen into the same segment as the background. So that's too high. What I want to do is I want to find one probably around 14 or 15 instead, where a lot of the background starts to coalesce together, but I can still see a clean background around my subject. So something around here. The other thing I want to do is I want to adjust my refinement down to a smaller setting, maybe about 4 for this image. What the refinement does is as it erases, it's going to automatically run the refine brush along the edge to clean it up. And if I have a very defined object on a solid background, a high amount of refinement is fine, but this is a very complex image. This is kind of a perfect masterclass, if you will. So I want to use a fairly small amount of that refine brush. Now, we're just going to use the drop brush. I'm going to make it bigger here. Come here, brush. Let's make you bigger. There we go. And I'm just going to start to paint over everything that I don't want in my scene. And you could do this in multiple steps. I'm just going to try to do one big gigantic brush stroke here to save us some time. And paint over everything that you don't want. There we go. We'll let go. And now it'll automatically throw all that stuff away for us. I'm going to take it out of segment view and I'm going to go to the all layers view so I can actually see what my results look like. All right, so we're getting closer. Let's make our brush a little bit smaller now. And let's go through and clean up this a little bit more. Now the area under their feet in the rocks we want to keep because that's actually going to stay in focus in our final version of the image. It's really just the stuff in the background and just a little bit in the foreground, the very bleeding edge of the foreground that we really want to blur. So I'm just going to come through here and I'm just going to continue to use that drop brush to get rid of the large segments that are close to the edge. If you make a mistake and you accidentally touch a segment that's part of your subject, you can just use the undo key to bring that area back. So just keep working with that drop brush. Again, these spots, I feel like I should be humming.
You're doing a fine job, Dan. Couple questions. Are you using fill lights on this shot? Reflectors?
This one is a flash. When you start to get to a larger group, especially a larger scene like this, reflector just doesn't really cut it. It doesn't have the, it's not broad enough to use. So this is actually just a little battery-powered Canon flash on a light stand. I think probably with an umbrella just to soften it a little bit out of the scene, and we use the I can't remember what the model number is on them, but Canon makes these really awesome little wireless sender unit that sits on the camera and automatically talks to the flash and tells it when to fire.
Yeah, I think
Nikon
those
has
were the
something just like it too.
SE2s, those little wireless. Somebody else has a great question. Not so much software, but like they shoot weddings and they're wondering, they've got 1,000 plus. Is there a rule of thumb that you use for, when you're doing these kind of edits, how much time you end up spending if you have a ton of images?
There's a couple different things that can help you with that. So the first one in doing the initial edit, I am a big fan, and weddings might be kind of the one where this rule doesn't work. A lot of people will go through and they start to throw away the stuff that they don't like. I do the opposite. I go through and I pick the stuff that I do like. So I'll go through and I use Lightroom, and they have like the P for pick to make it a select, and U to make it a normal, and X to throw it away. I'll go through and I'll just hit P on all of my favorites. And then once I've gone through and selected all my favorites, then I'll do a search that shows me just my favorites, and I'll look at what I've got left. And if that kind of covers everything, that's it. I'll throw everything else away.
Great,
So
great little tip. Thanks, Dan.
I'm a big fan of having as little to show as possible. Now it's a little tougher on a wedding because a wedding is a little bit more photojournalistic, and you really have to make sure you got everything in there. So with a wedding, you kind of almost have to go the other way. You kind of have to start by going through and throwing out all the bad stuff first. You want to err on having more than less on a wedding, but that's really more just the overall the file management editing, not the actual going through and doing retouching stuff. When it comes to going through and doing the stylization, I'll just pick a handful of my favorite ones, the ones that I think are awesome, the ones I'm going to put on my blog, and those are the ones that I'm going to do the work on. This is something where you do not do it on every image at all. The only time I would say that you kind of do the same thing on a big bunch of images is if you've created a stylized look for a specific shoot. For example, I think, let me just jump back to Lightroom for a second here. So like this one, we were going for kind of a vintage 70s look, and we wanted that same vintage 70s look on every shot. So we went into Perfect Effects and we used, I think, a vintage red-yellow filter and probably a couple others, saved that as a preset, and then batch processed everything using Lightroom. So you can actually, here inside of Lightroom, you could select a big group of images. So everything from that shoot that I want to add the same Perfect Effects look to, go to File and Export. And from the top, just pick Perfect Effects. And then you can then pick whatever preset you want. Whatever preset you've created, you can assign in here and then just apply it to every image that you shot and have it import and stack back with the originals. So that way every one of the originals has a copy that has that vintage look applied to it, and the vintage copy is stacked on top of it. It takes like an hour or something to go run the batch, but you don't have to do it manually.
So we've got some great tutorials on the website as well, covering batch processing to give you a stylized look for multiple images. Check that out.
All right, so now I've switched over to the refine brush, and I'm just going to run that refine brush along the edge now just to clean up this edge a little bit. Now this mask doesn't have to be 100% perfect because we can retouch it more when we get back into layers, and we can even retouch it in focal point as we're working on it. So Sometimes when you use the refine brush, it brings back some areas that you don't want that are close. You can always use the drop brush again after using the refine brush to help you clean those areas up quickly. So you don't always have to use them in the drop and then refine order. You can always do it the other way around too, which in a lot of ways I find is really great on a complex one like this. Nope, there I go. I'm humming now.
Question about the refine brush and the settings. Does that equate to anything? Value in pixels? Is it kind
Yes.
of a
So this
technical question?
refine is actually the pixels. It's the size of the brush that is run. So basically, whenever you use the drop brush, the adjacent segments, so the segments that you say, get rid of these, and then there's the segments that you didn't touch, those are the ones we assume you want to keep. We automatically run this refine brush along the boundary of those two segments. This refine is how big that brush is. So we'll run that with a 4-pixel brush along the edge.
Great.
All right, so we've gotten to here. We're getting pretty close. I want to go in and I just want to look at it with a grayscale mask just to see if there's any other little spots that we want to clean up. And I'm just going to use the regular old-fashioned masking brush here just to clean up any little bit of a haze that might be left over. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect now because we can continue to refine it later if we need to. And a handy part of it is once we actually get into focal point, we can actually see what it's going to look like. Now, this selection or this mask that we're creating is going to drive what gets blurred in focal point. All right, so that's probably good enough. I'm going to hit apply. This is going to apply that back as a layer mask on that layer. Now here's the cool part. This is what most people don't know, is that a layer mask that you create here inside of Perfect Layers can really be sent to any of the other modules in the Perfect Photo Suite. This is the way you make a selection in the suite. If you're not going to use the brushes inside of a certain plugin, you can always use a selection by creating a mask first. So I'm going to send this off to Perfect Focus. Now, when I view this in perfect focus, it's going to show me the whole image, but it's only going to operate on the part that was masked out. So I'm going to start off with that planar or that rectangular focus bug. I'm just going to bring it down here. There we go. And I'm going to invert it really fast. So down here under focus brush, let's pick invert selection. There we go. That looks better. So now we're blurring the part that was selected. I'll position my bug over what I want to keep in focus. In this case, the family on the couch. I'll stretch it out to pick the area. I can use the amount slider to control the amount. Again, this is one where you want to use a fairly small amount. You only need like 10 or 15. It's just enough to take the edge off that brick wall back there. There we go, something like that. And then to clean up, if there's any little bit of a fuzz, you notice on Dad, there's just a tiny little bit of halo around his head. We'll just grab the focus brush like we did before, and I'm just going to paint right along the edge of his head just to remove that halo. And what that's really doing is just cleaning up that selection and making sure that none of the pixels from his head are being used in the blur that's being calculated. That's a unique thing that only focal point can do. When you blur something with a mask, it knows to only use the stuff that's being protected by the mask so that you don't get halos. If you try to do that in Photoshop, you'll have a blue halo all the way around the couch and all the way around their heads. All right, so there we go. That is just about it. I think I want to fix that foreground just a little bit more. I'm just going to make my bug a little bit larger and bring it down just a little bit more because I want the area under their feet just a bit more in focus. That will make it look a bit more real. There we go. And I'm also going to add a little vignette. You can do that in just about any of the modules. I'm going to do it right here inside of focal point. Just grab the lightness slider and bring it down a little bit. And I'm going to uncheck this little option that says vignette follows focus bug because I really want it to just touch the corners of my image. There we go. Let's apply that. Now when it applies, it's going to go back into layers, but the layer mask is still going to be there. All I need to do is just throw that mask away now. So here's the resultant focal point layer. The blur is actually there. We just can't see it because it's hidden by the mask. So we'll just throw away the mask like that. So there's our results. So we went from here, that's our original. Let me close some stuff here so it's a little easier to see. So that was our original, and that's our results. And that's how you can use a complex selection created in mask or layers inside of any of the modules of the suite.